God bless you all. Hope everybody's doing okay. Been a little bit different at my house this year. The weather's been very nice, but health-wise, haven't done too great. But that's the way it is also. Just like fishing, you never know what the day's going to bring you. You just go out and praise the Lord and try to enjoy it best you can. I've had sinus infections, and I've had stomach viruses, and a little bit of everything, but we thank the good Lord that He helps us through all of it, and gives us another day to be able to praise Him, but also gives us another day that we can go out and go fishing. So first of all, I want to thank you all very much. It's definitely all the videos that I've been blessed with. I mean, I'm just a regular guy, just like everybody else, but thankful that everything I've been at least talking about has helped you all. Hope it's blessed you and helped you catch a few more fish. Hope it's blessed you to have a little more fun on the water. The experiences that I have are exactly that. They're experiences that I've had. I mean, I'm kind of different in a way that I take the time to test a lot of theories. I test a lot of things that I don't just go by what other people say. As you can tell probably in watching these videos, I'm not the guy that says, well, in the wintertime you gotta slow way down and drag a shaky head and drag a jig, and that's about all you can do. There are more ways to catch those little bass than people realize, and not all of them have to involve dragging a jig or a shaky head. I do like a lot of little baits, like I'll throw those little swim baits and little drop shots and things on my spinning rod at times, Ned rigs and stuff. But sometimes, and has become over the last couple of years, especially just since I've gotten a little bit older and shoulder, really the movement of rods constant has kind of led me towards this. I've kind of always thrown a crankbait, but not as much as I have in the last at least year and a half, 2 years. And I have been blessed to catch quite a few, not just 2 pound or 2.5 pound bass, but I've caught my share of 3 to 5 pounders, and even some that are a little bit bigger. Going to just regular lakes, that's another thing. I mean, these lakes aren't really known to have monsters in them, but I've been blessed enough to catch some pretty good fish and be fairly consistent catching fish too. So one of the tools that I have been blessed to acquire, and that's what this video is going to be about, is St. Croix Legend glass rod. This rod here is a crankbait rod. Now, a lot of people will use this medium heavy for bladed jigs. They'll even use a little bit longer one. I think it's a 7.2 heavy action, but I have seen reviews. A lot of people use this rod here for them. But we're going to talk a little bit about the one that I own, which I'm actually blessed to have 2 of them. This is a 610 medium heavy power. It's got a moderate action, of course, and it's a Legend glass. And one of the things that a lot of times it's supposed to hold from 10 to 20 pound line, 3/8 to 1 ounce. It does have a parabolic bend to it, and you can see that it bends quite a bit, but it also has, and it bends all the way back through the whole rod. It does have a little bit stiffer midsection than some crankbait specific rods, but it's interesting how when you go to set a hook on a fish, or not, I guess when a fish loads up on the rod is the right way to say it, it has enough strength and backbone behind it to where it still keeps that fish pinned. I think that's probably the hardest thing for somebody to understand. Do you need a crankbait rod to throw crankbaits with? No, you don't have to. I mean, you can pick up your medium heavy regular jig rod, you can throw crankbaits out that's store-bought, and you can hook fish with it. Are you going to land all those fish? Well, it depends a lot what season it is. If those fish are hot in the springtime, you might. You might very well do that. I mean, I did it for years. The difference is going to be is during the spring, they're going to inhale that bait a little better. They're going to attack it harder. So therefore, you probably will. You'll probably hook a lot of those fish. If you're throwing it in later on in the year, in the fall time, probably not. They're not going to hit it as violent. They're not going to hit it with such strength in the middle of summertime if you're working a little bit bigger crankbaits. Why is that? We're going to talk about that just a little bit. Why is it that it seems like fish come off of those other ones? Because there's a lot of little theories on YouTube, but there's not very many people that I've seen that actually stop and talk to you and tell you, and that's what I'm going to try to do. Okay, I'm going to try my best to keep this a little smaller video and not go too long, but I'm going to try to help a little bit understand what the deal is between why buy a crankbait rod. This Legend Glass one, I'll give you a little bit of background. I've had the Shimano SLX crankbait rod in medium action. I've had the G Loomis IMX Pro in a crankbait rod in a medium action. I've had the E6X from G Loomis crankbait rod in a medium action. I've also had the Arc rod in a Tharp series. I've had them in a crankbait rod. I've had a Daiwa in a heavier fiberglass rod that was all fiberglass. There wasn't any composite to it. I've had the older literal fiberglass rods. I don't remember the brand that I had, but I had an older one. And so the biggest thing that I can tell you is when it comes to throwing a crankbait is different than throwing a jig, than throwing a worm. A worm or a jig, you're working the bait. It's kind of moving in the water, but it's kind of moving slack, okay? They come up behind it, they inhale the bait. That's what the tick that you initially feel. The tick that you feel isn't them grabbing it and putting it in their pocket because they don't have it. What you're feeling on that jig or that worm, that tick, is actually they're hitting your line because the bait is going in their mouth and that line is hitting either their mouth or their face, or you're feeling that bait itself hit their mouth, okay? So that's the actual tick that you're feeling, is when they inhale that bait inside their mouth, okay? When you're moving a bait and that bait's coming along at a pretty good speed, or maybe not, they have to have a second to inhale that bait. We'll talk later on. I'll talk about my favorite spinnerbait rod and why I like that action in a rod. But it's the same principle. So, I mean, a lot of times a spinnerbait, we don't think about it, but a spinnerbait's kind of the same thing. You're reeling it along and all of a sudden the bass comes up, grabs it, he turns his head, he hooks, and then he gets your fish. So in our minds, we think, well, then a crankbait should be the same way. I mean, I've got these hooks on here and I've got 6 of them and I should be able to hook the bass even better. Well, the problem is, if you look at a jig, the size of the hooks, okay, isn't the same. Another thing you have to look at it is on a single hook that you would have on a jig, a lot of times you drive that complete hook up through the roof of their mouth, okay? Hard to do that. Most of the time what happens with the crankbait is they get stuck, okay? And they get stuck maybe about halfway down the barb. Every now and then you'll have a complete barb come all the way through, but most of the time they're stuck on the side of the face, they're stuck on the side of their mouth, halfway sideways in their mouth, and as they shake, the bait starts to loosen. And a lot of that has to do with it's interesting to me because it's not just about, and I've had them before, that's why I mentioned all those different rods. Some rods, and I had an Abu Garcia winch as well, which I still use from time to time. But my favorite has become this Legend Glass in that medium heavy action, because you need the right combination. You need the right combination of strength to set the hook, but you also need the right combination to let the fish absorb the bait. So you have to have both in order to have a good system. You hear famous KVD talk about a system. You hear a lot of the other anglers talk about their cranking system. That's basically what you have to develop if you want to have a successful crankbait setup. Now here's what I'm going to tell you. If you already have a medium heavy rod, and I understand everybody is not going to be able to afford, not everybody wants to invest. All of us have the money, don't want to invest it. I don't want to go out and buy, you know, expensive crankbait rod. I want to either keep using the one I'm using, or I want to keep using my medium action, fast action rod. Then my suggestion is look into copolymer line or look into monofilament line. A lot of people, what they want to do is they want to go to braid. Well, if that's your choice, that's fine. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's the equation you need to have. Something needs to give when that fish is fighting. Now, I'm not talking about give as far as a soft little whip, because last year I lost several nice fish because I had a softer action rod, plus I had monofilament. Now the monofilament is very easy to cast in the wintertime, even when it's down to 30 degrees. It's very easy to cast because it's so soft, so it's very limp. So fluorocarbon tends to get even stiffer the colder it gets. But the things that I ran into was monofilament absorbs water, so therefore your hands, the hand that you were using to hold your reel stayed cold because it would get water on it, because as you spin the reel, it kind of splashes on your hand. You can't help it. And it's not much, but it's enough that when you're in 31, 32 degree outside, that it keeps your hand cold. So the thing that it also does is it stretches. So if you have a wimpy rod and it stretches also the line, you don't have enough force to drive the hook in. You can overcompensate it by pulling harder on your rod, okay? But when you're pulling harder on your rod, you're trying your best to keep up with the rod, and you're keeping up with tension at the same time you're cold, and at the same time you're trying to fight the fish. There's almost too much going on, or there was to me. So what I started experimenting with, I said, okay, well, in the next crankbait rod I get, maybe I'm going to get a medium heavy. And then I'm going to use that monofilament, see if that makes up the difference. So the brands that I got in a medium heavy, what I learned about crankbait rods is that sometimes they're exactly that. They're almost too stiff. Some of the medium action rods that I have, like that I had, like that SLX, wonderful rod, great price point. But the problem for me was I couldn't cast a lot of the smaller baits because the tip on it wasn't very limber. It had decent action throughout the rod, a moderate action, but the tip of it wouldn't let me cast lighter weight baits. So anything that was in that 5/16 range was hard to cast. And there a lot of times, like you got OG Tiny, you got that little Black Label, you got several little baits that, little bandits, things that way that are 1/4 ounce. Those are hard baits to throw on a crankbait setup that has too stiff of a tip. Well, then I went to the other extreme again, and because I wound up getting a good deal on it, I wound up getting the G Loomis rods that I was telling you about. Well, the problem with them is they were almost too much of a bend. The problem that I had with those is they were really good at casting those little smaller baits, okay? But when I was to pick up a OG Slim or something like that, it was too heavy for those rod setups. So what I wound up having to do was I wound up having to say, okay, so I had to really sit down one day and I had to decide, you know, because I'm like I said, I'm no different than you all. I can't, there for a while I had a few, I said, but I can't really afford to have, you know, 25 different rod setups laying on my deck. Which ones am I really going to use? Is there a way for me to find something that's a little more versatile? Is there a way for me to find a rod that I can be content with and happy with? And trust me, I'm picky in a way, so it's not easy. Is it possible to find a setup that'll do a little bit of both? Can I throw a square bill that's a 1/2 ounce weight? Can I throw that OG Slim? Can I also throw a 5/16 black label if I want to? Can I also throw a little bandit if I want to? You know, if I want to go down one day and I'm not very good with the wiggle warts, I haven't caught very many fish on them, but if I decide one day that I want to throw a wiggle wart, can I just take my line off and cast something else? And I know a lot of you is going to say, well, yeah, you can do that with anything. Well, you can't. You can't, because you have to be able to have a balance between all your line and everything in order to do that, in order to get the right action out of that bait. You have to be able to have that softer tip on that rod to where you need the right combination in order to throw those little baits on a consistent basis. So this is probably what separates me from a lot of the everyday thinking, and I'm no way, shape, or form saying that I'm smarter. I'm just saying this is probably what separates me, because I tend to overthink things a little bit, and I tend to experiment until I find something that's working. Not just something, but I also have to have something that I like doing, I like using. So this right here has probably become one of my favorite wintertime baits. But I'll be honest with you, because it's a flat bait, it is different the way you have to cast it. You have to cast it because the wind will catch it where it's got these bigger flat sides. The OG Tiny has a little more weight to it, but so far I've been more productive with this little bait here than even I have the OG Tiny, and I haven't even put in half as amount of time as I have with this bait as I have, and this is just a Bagley flat balsa bait too. But it's one of a lot of the different crankbaits that I like using. But in the winter, this winter especially, this is a little balsa bait that I've been using. Okay, so this rod setup, okay, this Legend Glass fits what I like to do very well. I like to be able to have the option, and that's why I've been blessed. And when I saw the opportunity, I took it to get 2 of these setups, because it's very lightweight rod. That's something that the old fiberglass rods were very heavy. Casting all day long, I talked to you about my shoulder. I needed something that wasn't so hard on my shoulders. But I needed something that was dependable. I needed something at the same time that was very sensitive. I can feel these crankbaits vibrate. Each different crankbait that I tie on, I can feel it vibrate differently. That's something that's very important. Something also that's very important, and you wouldn't think so, but in the winter, you really need that sensitivity, because the bites, the load up on the baits, that's something that a lot of people don't think about too, is that in the wintertime when a fish, so in the summertime we were talking about how a bass just slams a bait, grabs it, rips it, he's really wanting it. Now that happens every now and then in the winter. But for the most part, you're going to get a load up on your rod that all of a sudden the fish is going to be there. And the only reason you know if something's different is because the vibration changed on your crankbait. This rod allows me to do that. Some of those other crankbait rods that were also combined, composite and fiberglass, weren't that sensitive. You hear a lot of people talk about they lose the sensitivity when they go to the composite type rods. Well, the way that I countered that was I use 15-pound fluorocarbon. And I know a lot of people go down less than that. I stick with the 15 because I tend to fish around shallow. I fish around brush, cover a lot. I really like throwing crankbaits around some type of brush, some type of cover. You don't always have to hit cover. That's a whole nother video in itself. But I like fishing around some type of cover. But that fluorocarbon also adds to my sensitivity just a little bit. And you say, well, why don't you just throw braid? Well, braid has its own problems. Okay, a lot of people I know, they live and die by braid, and then they just add a leader. I get it. A lot of people, everybody has their own little system. I personally don't care for the braid. After you cast and cast and cast a lot during the day with a bait caster and you have a crankbait, if you do have a backlash, it takes forever to get them out. Sometimes you don't get them out. Braid, the price of braid is just way too expensive for me. On average, I can get a 1,000-yard spool of 15-pound seaguar for about $50 when I get it on Amazon. Just a red label, and that pretty much does me for a while. Okay, the braid, it's too expensive. If I go down the road and I happen to not have that big spool with me, I usually keep an extra spool of a couple different types of lines, just cheaper lines, just in case a backlash happens. But the braid is totally different. The braid also has a tendency, whether people agree or not, but I've had it happen, cut through your guides, especially when you're dealing with thousands of casts a day. Okay, it's not for me. I've tried it. I've messed up reels with it. If you don't have your drag set up right, if it happens to wrap around your guide, when you go to pull it, get it out of trees, sometimes it'll cut you. It'll cut into the trees. To me, it's just a lot of trouble. So I just use Seaguar. Okay, I use the Seaguar Black Label. Is it sometimes better to use copolymers and different things? Yes, and I've done it, but you do lose a little bit of the sensitivity. Now, I probably will go to the copolymer a little more during the summer. I'm going to try one of the rods with it, and I did last year for a little while, but it has more to do with keeping the bait up top, because I have some weight baits that I really want to throw next year. And that's the thing too. See, this setup here, this setup that I have, this Legend Glass, and I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just telling you, this is what I've leaned to. Since I do a lot of roll casts and a lot of casts close, I like this 610 model because it's easier to handle around hanging trees and different things. But you've also seen me fish this setup at Cumberland. It does quite fine throwing baits. 5/16 or heavier, even those little quarter-inch or quarter-ounce bandits, it does fine throwing them at a pretty good distance out in the open area. So this works perfect for me. I can throw 5/16 all the way up to a 1/2 ounce crankbait, which is pretty much what I need. The biggest baits that I've thrown with is a DT10. I've thrown rock crawlers and things with it. It's very helpful to me to be able to have a setup that I can switch back and forth. Sometimes I'll have a flat bait, and then I'll have a fatter bait also. And I'm just going down the lake trying to see which one they hit best. So I have the exact same setups in order to do that. This allows me to do both. If I want to switch and I want to throw that weight bait, then this is the rod that I also pick up, because it allows me to do that as well. But you have to sit down, and my advice to you is, and I know everybody doesn't have the time, everybody doesn't have the patience, but you need to honestly sit down, and if you really want to fish crankbaits and want to be successful with them, take little bits and pieces of what people say. The line, the rods, the reels, the gear ratios, all this information, and just go yourself and see if it makes a difference, see if it helps. You're not going to be able to go out and just spend automatically and buy a system and be content with it. I couldn't tell you how many different rods, okay? This is the rod that I am personally content with myself. A lot of them seemed okay, and the durability just wasn't there. A lot of them did fine for a little while, and then putting them in the rod locker one day, the tips broke off, and that was the end of that. You know, some of them just casting one day and happened to hit a limb, touch another rod, they broke. This one here I've had for about 3 months, and you say, well, you haven't really had it that long. I'm going to tell you though, in that 3 months time, you see the videos for yourself, I have caught my share of fish with it, landed my share of fish with it, and the versatility that I've been able to have with this rod, I'm telling you, is unmatched compared to all the other rods that I've had concerning crankbaits. Unmatched completely, okay? There isn't a rod out there that I've been able to compare the sensitivity, plus the bend, plus the ability to throw little baits, and it being a medium heavy. Absolutely has impressed me, okay? What else can I say about it? The warranty that it has with it, you'll have to look all that stuff up online. I don't really want to mention anything about the warranty. Like I said, I'm not, St. Croix doesn't pay me to do this. I just like using the rod that they have. I actually, for years, and I'll give you this little piece of information, for years, the rods that I always wanted to use, that I always dreamed that I couldn't wait. If I was going to save up one day and finally get in a situation where I could buy one rod, which one it was going to be? It was going to be G Loomis. And when I finally got to that point where I had a handful of G Loomis IMX Pro rods, and I had G Loomis crankbait specific rods, and boy, I had it made. I'll just be honest with you. They are good rods, but for the price that I gave for them, to me, I don't have the same sensitivity, I don't have the same confidence in those rods when it came to crankbaits as I do this rod here. I was really amazed and really impressed the more I studied, the more I researched about this Legend Glass rod. And like I said, a lot of it has to do, and I don't know how they do it, but it has to do with the bend in that rod. Because while you're reeling a crankbait along, the crankbait, no matter what the crankbait is, even like those DT10s, doesn't overpower the rod, okay? It doesn't overpower when you go to when a first fish loads up on it, it doesn't overpower the rod. I never feel like I don't have that fish under control. Don't get me wrong, when you hit those big 3-4 pound smallmouth and they hit you on that crankbait, I don't think anybody ever feels in control because they go every which direction. But even so, I've been blessed to have those fish pinned. Now, the next trip I go on, I may lose 3 or 4 fish, and if I do, that's fine. That's something else I want to tell you. The rod isn't going to always catch you every fish. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you'll be amazed when you start going to a crankbait-specific rod how much difference it really makes in your crankbait fishing. Can you get by with a medium action, regular fast action rod? Sure you can. Can you use cobalt or seagull or braid, whatever you want? Sure you can, okay? And if that's working for you, great. But if it's not, and it seems like you're struggling, it seems like, man, it's just hard to cast these. If it seems like, you really want to pick up a crankbait and you love throwing crankbaits and just love feeling that tick through the rocks, love feeling that type of fish, and you want to try it for a while and see, my suggestion is go out and get you a crankbait specific rod and go from there. Work with your line types, work with different things, and you'll see a big difference. And I know I did as soon as I started doing that. But anyway, that's my review. Another simple thing is I know a lot of people are going to say, well, if you throw a lot of crankbaits, then why don't you go to the 7.2 and just launch those longer crankbaits? I've thrown a lot of the deep diver crankbaits, and I'll be honest with you, to me, they're a lot of work. And I know that people say that if you have the right setup and that little bit longer rod, well, my Ranger boat's a little bit older, and anything over a 7'1" really doesn't fit in the rod locker. and I prefer to have my rods in the rod locker for the most part when I take people with me. Like if I'm with by myself, then it's not as bad, but I'm always worried about breaking the tips off and everything else, because I've done it before. I would rather have these little 6'10", 7-foot rods that I can just slide in that rod locker and not have to worry about it. I usually try not to keep more than 2 or 3 rods out on the deck with me at one time. And here lately, it's crankbait rods are usually what's on my deck, unless it's really real clear water. And then I've usually probably got 3 spinning rods in my hand, which I've been blessed to get one of these in a spinning rod version too, just for those shad wraps and different baits. But that's another video in itself too. Anyway, I know this video is long. If you don't make it through the whole video, I understand. Just something that was on my mind that I wanted to do. I wanted to talk a little about it. I mentioned the rods in about all the videos that I use crankbaits with, but I wanted to actually stop and be very specific on just this rod setup. To me, it's just the perfect action to do every range of crankbait there is that I like to fish anyway. Those little Bandit 200s, little wiggle warts if you want to throw them. I know 15-pound line's a little bit heavier for those wiggle warts, but square bills, I love throwing square bills around stuff. I love throwing these little balsa baits, DT6s, DT8, DT10s, the little DT4s even. I throw them on this little rod. I've thrown those little bomber weight baits. I've got a few Bagley baits on the way that I want to try a few more of those, little B1. I've also got some B weights coming, so I can't wait to throw those. But anyway, like I said, I don't want to make this too long, but that's just my review. That's my opinion about these Legend Glass 6'10" medium heavy action rods. So God bless you all. Hope all this information, I hope at least 1 or 2 things help you. Hope it blesses you. I hope you all doing great. Hope everybody has a happy new year. Every day is in the Lord's hands. I'm thankful for the blessings He gives me. Thankful for every breath He gives me. I've been blessed all year long. I've probably gone more times fishing this year than I probably have any other year in my life. So I'm very thankful that every time that He's allowed me to go to the lake, He's brought me back home. God bless you all. Y'all have a great day, but don't forget, more than anything, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a great day.